Success in the 1970s could be brutal. One moment, you were everywhere, selling millions of records, filling arenas, dominating radio. And then, almost overnight, you became a joke. Critics turned on you, the cool crowd laughed, your fans stayed, but your credibility vanished. Some bands never recovered from the ridicule, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too loudly, too visibly, and too commercially. These are the bands that learned a harsh lesson in the 1970s. Popularity could be weaponized against you. Here are 10 bands from the 1970s that went from superstars to laughingstocks. Number 10, Bay City Rollers. The tartan pants should have been the first warning sign. When the Bay City Rollers arrived from Scotland in the mid-1970s, they didn't just bring songs, they brought a phenomenon. Matching plaid outfits, platform shoes, haircuts that looked aggressively homemade. Teenage girls went into hysterics. Airports turned into chaos zones. Concerts became scenes of mass screaming. The media called it roller mania, openly comparing it to Beatlemania at its peak. In January 1976, Saturday Night hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. For a brief, surreal moment, the Bay City Rollers were labeled the biggest band since the Beatles. They had their own television show. Their faces covered every teen magazine. They were selling out arenas across America. But while fans screamed, critics sharpened their knives. The music was dismissed as disposable bubblegum pop, manufactured, calculated, designed, critics said, to separate teenage girls from their allowance money. Session musicians were used on recordings because the band members themselves weren't considered serious enough. The choreography, the uniforms, the relentless branding. To anyone over the age of 16, the Rollers didn't look rebellious. They looked ridiculous. In one cruel contradiction, an American poll voted them the worst band in the world. The same year they were selling out massive venues. The band members could actually play, but no one wanted to hear that. The tartan outfits and screaming fans had already sealed their fate. To the rock establishment, the Bay City Rollers became everything wrong with commercial pop music. Their fall from superstardom wasn't caused by failure, it was caused by image. Number 9, the Osmonds. Clean cut, wholesome, smiling from ear to ear. The Osmonds represented everything rock purists despised. They came from Utah. They were Mormon. They looked like they'd never had a rebellious thought in their lives. In the early 1970s, that image worked perfectly, at least commercially. One Bad Apple hit #1 in 1971, a string of chart successes followed. The Osmonds were suddenly everywhere. Television variety shows, talk shows, merchandise, eventually even their own Saturday morning cartoon. Young audiences loved them. Parents approved of them. Everyone else laughed. To critics and serious rock fans, the Osmonds felt artificial, overpackaged, corporate. The matching outfits, the choreographed routines, the constant smiling. All screamed manufactured pop. And yet the uncomfortable truth was this. The Osmonds were genuinely talented. They could sing. They could harmonize. Several of them were accomplished musicians. But none of that mattered. They weren't judged on musicianship. They were judged on what they represented. They were positioned as the squeaky clean alternative to rock and roll's danger, sexuality, and rebellion. And for the rock establishment, that was unforgivable. Music critics savaged them as low-risk pop engineered for profit. Bubblegum music with no edge, no grit, no threat. By the mid-1970s, admitting you liked the Osmonds was social suicide for anyone trying to maintain musical credibility. You could buy the records, you could secretly enjoy the songs, but you didn't talk about it. The Osmonds sold millions of albums while becoming punchlines at the same time. Their fall wasn't due to scandal or failure or even bad music. It happened because they were too clean for a culture that demanded rebellion. In a decade obsessed with authenticity, the Osmonds looked fake, even when they weren't. Number 8, Electric Light Orchestra. Violins in rock music made purists nervous. When Electric Light Orchestra emerged in the early 1970s, many rock fans didn't know what to do with them. Cellos, violins, full orchestral arrangements, layered on top of electric guitars. This wasn't how rock was supposed to sound. Jeff Lynne had a clear vision. He wanted to pick up where the Beatles left off, not by copying them, but by expanding pop and rock into something symphonic, cinematic, and meticulously constructed. And it worked. Evil Woman, Livin' Thing, Telephone Line. By the mid to late 1970s, ELO were hitmakers. The melodies were undeniable. The harmonies were rich. The production was flawless. That perfection became the problem. Critics accused ELO of being overproduced, too polished, too calculated. Every note felt planned because it was planned. Rock purists wanted sweat and mistakes. They wanted the sound of real people struggling together in a room. ELO offered the opposite. Layer upon layer of carefully engineered sound that felt more like a studio construction than a live performance. The stage shows didn't help their reputation. Giant spaceships, laser lights, sci-fi imagery. To critics, it all felt excessive. Spectacle disconnected from rock's rebellious roots. Then came 1979. ELO leaned into disco elements on Discovery. And in 1980, they released Xanadu with Olivia Newton-John. For many fans, that was the breaking point. The move felt like a sellout, another band chasing trends instead of defending artistic purity. Critics piled on, dismissing ELO as glossy commercial pop disguised as serious music. Pompous, pretentious, trying too hard to be important. John Lennon famously called them the sons of the Beatles. But many journalists heard something else entirely. They heard ambition mistaken for arrogance. The labels stuck, overproduced, overthought, overblown. Ironically, the meticulous production critics hated was exactly what made ELO's music timeless. But in the 1970s, precision was a crime, and Electric Light Orchestra paid for it with ridicule, despite their success. Number 7, Kansas.
You stepped inside with a vibe I ain't never seen.
In 1978, there was no escaping Dust in the Wind. It played at proms, school dances, graduations. Every moment when someone wanted to feel reflective, deep, and philosophical, the song was delicate, acoustic guitar, gentle melody, lyrics about the fleeting nature of existence. It was also painfully earnest, and that made it dangerous. Kansas had an identity problem from the start. They came from the American heartland, Middle America, not London, not New York. Yet they played progressive rock with classical influences, complex arrangements, extended structures, prominent violin parts. To rock purists, the combination felt wrong. Were they serious artists, or Midwestern musicians pretending to be sophisticated? Critics didn't know how to categorize them. So many chose to dismiss them instead.
All we are is dust in the wind.
Art rock fans found Kansas too commercial. Commercial rock fans found them too strange. They fell into the worst possible position, respected by no one group completely. Dust in the Wind made everything worse. Its massive popularity turned the band into a symbol of overexposed sincerity. Every time the song played while couples swayed with lighters in the air, Kansas lost a little more credibility with the cool crowd. The philosophical lyrics started to sound corny. The emotional openness felt cheesy. The seriousness became an easy target for mockery. In an era increasingly influenced by punk's aggression and new wave's irony, Kansas looked out of touch. Too thoughtful, too sincere, too earnest. They kept touring, they kept recording, but the label stuck. Kansas became that prom song band. They hadn't failed musically. They hadn't sold out creatively. They simply took their emotions seriously. And in the late 1970s, that was enough to make you uncool. Number 6, REO Speedwagon.
In my eyes, baby, there was something.
To punk rockers, they represented everything that had gone wrong. By the late 1970s, REO Speedwagon had spent years doing things the hard way. Relentless touring, modest album sales, grinding it out city by city. They were a working band. No gimmicks, no overnight success. Then the power ballads arrived. Keep On Loving You, released in 1980 but forged through their late 70s evolution, changed everything. It was perfectly constructed for arena crowds. Slow build, Big chorus. Emotion pushed right to the edge. Audiences loved it. Critics didn't. The sincerity became the problem. To the underground and punk scenes, REO Speedwagon sounded like emotional manipulation wrapped in glossy production, heartland rock with lyrics that wore their feelings openly and proudly, but in a cultural moment that prized anger, irony, and detachment, that openness felt embarrassing. Kevin Cronin's delivery was earnest, unapologetically emotional, no sneer, no distance. To critics who valued rawness and abrasion, it felt calculated, even when it wasn't. REO Speedwagon became shorthand for safe rock. Music for radio, music for couples, music you enjoyed privately but didn't defend publicly. People bought the records, they filled the arenas, but they didn't want to admit it to their cooler friends. The band crossed into guilty pleasure territory. That label stuck hard. REO Speedwagon were accused of choosing chart success over credibility, despite the fact they'd earned that success through years of work. They didn't suddenly become popular. They simply reached the audience they'd always been chasing. Still, the mockery followed them everywhere. They laughed all the way to the bank, but the laughter wasn't theirs. Their fall into ridicule wasn't caused by selling out. It was caused by refusing to hide sincerity in an era that demanded cynicism. Number 5, Foreigner.
Take a little time
Radio couldn't escape Foreigner, and that was the problem. By the late 1970s, their songs were everywhere. Feels Like the First Time, Cold as Ice, perfectly structured, perfectly produced, perfectly unavoidable. Foreigner were built by professionals. Mick Jones had spent years inside the industry, learning exactly how hit records worked: song structure, hooks, dynamics, timing. Nothing was accidental. That competence brought massive success, but it also invited contempt. To critics, Foreigner sounded manufactured, music assembled in a laboratory for maximum commercial efficiency. Every chorus hit exactly when it should. Every verse served a purpose. There were no rough edges, no danger.
climb any mountain.
As punk and new wave gained momentum, that polish became a liability. The underground wanted urgency, imperfection, the sound of something about to fall apart. Foreigner offered the opposite: control, precision, consistency. Reviewers began describing their music as sterile, fast food rock, easy to consume, easy to forget. Even as the hits kept coming, the backlash intensified. Foreigner's dominance of radio playlists made them symbolic villains. They weren't just successful, they were too successful. By the early 1980s, Foreigner had become shorthand for everything alternative music fans rejected: corporate rock, safe rock, rock with no rebellion left. The irony was impossible to ignore. Millions of people genuinely loved these songs. They sang along, they bought the albums, they packed arenas, but loving Foreigner didn't make you look cool. Their fall into mockery didn't happen because the music stopped working. It happened because the culture changed, and professionalism suddenly looked like selling out. Foreigner didn't lose their audience. They lost their credibility. Number 4, Boston. More Than a Feeling sounded almost too perfect. Every note was clean, every harmony precise, every chorus engineered to feel enormous. That wasn't an illusion. Tom Scholz had literally built the sound in his basement, layering guitars, stacking vocals, refining tones with scientific precision. The result was spectacular and unsettling. When Boston's self-titled debut arrived in 1976, it exploded, one of the fastest-selling debut albums in rock history. Radio stations couldn't stop playing it. The songs were undeniable, the production flawless. That perfection was exactly what critics hated. To many, Boston didn't sound like a band, they sounded like a machine. There was no sweat, no chaos, no sense of risk. Everything felt controlled, calculated. As punk rock began tearing through the late 1970s with its raw DIY ethos, Boston's pristine sound felt increasingly artificial. While punk bands celebrated mistakes and immediacy, Boston erased them. More Than a Feeling became a symbol, not of inspiration, but of excess polish. Too smooth, too engineered, too safe. Tom Scholz's background didn't help. An MIT graduate, he approached music like an engineering problem: efficiency, optimization, repeatable results. The sound was brilliant, but to critics, it felt cold. Boston sold millions of albums while being dismissed as corporate rock at its most soulless. They hadn't sacrificed musicianship, they hadn't chased trends, they'd simply removed imperfection. And in a decade increasingly obsessed with authenticity, that made them easy to mock. Number 3, Journey.
Open my eyes to a new kind of way.
By the end of the 1970s, Journey had mastered the art of excess, soaring vocals, towering choruses, songs engineered for tens of thousands of voices singing in unison. They hadn't started that way. Journey began as a progressive rock band with jazz influences, long solos, complex arrangements. Musicianship came first, then Steve Perry joined. Everything changed. The songs got shorter, the hooks got bigger, the emotion moved front and center, and the audience exploded. Journey became arena rock royalty, selling out stadiums, dominating radio, and perfecting a formula built for mass catharsis. That formula came with a cost. To critics, Steve Perry's vocals were too much, too dramatic, too theatrical, too emotional. Every high note felt engineered to trigger a response. Hands in the air, lighters lit, voices raised. To rock purists and the emerging punk and new wave scenes, it all felt manipulative. The emotion wasn't raw, it was designed. Journey's pivot toward radio-friendly power ballads was seen as a betrayal, a calculated move away from experimentation and toward mainstream dominance.
Open my eyes to a new kind of way.
The word sellout followed them everywhere. By the late 1970s, Journey symbolized everything the underground wanted to destroy: arena rock, excessive production, emotion without irony. They weren't just uncool, they were the enemy. While punk bands played small clubs fueled by anger and defiance, Journey filled stadiums with polished emotion and precision. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Journey kept winning commercially, but culturally, they were losing ground. They became punchlines for music fans who valued danger over drama. Their fall into mockery wasn't about talent or success. It was about scale. Journey became too big, too polished, and too sincere for a culture that had turned against all three. Number 2, Kiss. No band in the 1970s divided opinion more aggressively than Kiss. To fans, they were unstoppable. To critics, they were a joke. Kiss didn't just play concerts, they staged spectacles. Fire-breathing, blood-spitting, explosions, flying rigs. Arena rock looked modest by comparison. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons understood something most bands didn't. Music alone wasn't enough. They created characters. The demon, the star child, the spaceman, the catman. Each member became a symbol, not just a musician. The makeup wasn't a gimmick. It was the concept. And it worked. Kiss sold out arenas, built one of the most devoted fan bases in rock history, and turned their name into a global brand. That success enraged rock purists. Critics argued that Kiss replaced substance with spectacle, that the explosions compensated for limited musicianship, that the theatrics distracted from basic songwriting. To journalists who believed rock should be about authenticity and rebellion, Kiss looked like a cartoon. And then came the merchandise. Lunchboxes, action figures, comic books, pinball machines. Kiss weren't just a band anymore, they were a business. To many critics, that was unforgivable. Rock was supposed to reject commercialism, not embrace it. Music magazines mocked them relentlessly. Reviews were savage. Their credibility as musicians was constantly questioned, but the ridicule didn't slow them down. Kiss leaned into everything critics hated: the excess, the spectacle, the shameless ambition. They didn't apologize for selling out arenas. They didn't pretend they weren't chasing success. They embraced being loud, theatrical, and unapologetically commercial. And in doing so, they turned mockery into a business model. By the end of the decade, Kiss were millionaires. Still ridiculed, still dismissed, but still winning. In the eyes of serious music fans, Kiss became a symbol of everything rock wasn't supposed to be. To their fans, that was exactly the point. Number 1, Bee Gees.
Know your eyes in the morning sun. I feel you touch me in the...
No band in the 1970s absorbed more hatred than the Bee Gees. When Saturday Night Fever arrived in 1977, it didn't just dominate charts. It reshaped popular culture. Disco exploded into the mainstream. Dance floors filled, radio surrendered, and the Bee Gees became the face of it all. High-pitched falsettos, tight pants, shimmering lights, relentless rhythm. To rock purists, everything about the Bee Gees represented betrayal. But here's what history often forgets. The Gibb brothers weren't newcomers chasing trends. They had been successful since the late 1960s. They wrote sophisticated pop songs with complex harmonies. Artists like Al Green and Nina Simone covered their material. They were respected songwriters long before disco entered the picture. Then came You Should Be Dancing in 1976. Then Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, How Deep Is Your Love. The Saturday Night Fever soundtrack sold over 40 million copies. For a moment, the Bee Gees were the biggest act on the planet. And then the backlash arrived. Fast, loud, vicious. Disco Sucks became a rallying cry.
I feel you touch me in the pouring rain.
T-shirts were printed, radio DJs fanned the flames. On July 12, 1979, the hatred turned physical. At Comiskey Park in Chicago, radio host Steve Dahl staged Disco Demolition Night. Between games of a baseball doubleheader, thousands of disco records were blown up on the field. The crowd rioted, the stadium was stormed, the second game was canceled. More than 50,000 people showed up, not for baseball but to destroy disco. The Bee Gees became the symbol of everything rock fans wanted erased. Their records were burned. They received death threats. Radio stations quietly blacklisted their music. Magazine covers that praised them months earlier now mocked them mercilessly. Overnight, they went from cultural kings to public enemies. Historians later examined the backlash and noted racial and homophobic undertones. Disco had been closely tied to Black, Latino, and LGBTQ communities. But in 1979, the message was simple. Disco had to die, and the Bee Gees would pay for it. The irony was devastating. The falsetto wasn't a gimmick. It was a deliberate artistic choice. The production was meticulous. The songwriting was sharp. None of it mattered. Once they became the symbol of disco, nuance disappeared. Even after disco faded, the mockery remained. Falsetto became a punchline. The Bee Gees became shorthand for embarrassment. Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb shifted into songwriting for others. They wrote massive hits behind the scenes, proving their talent never vanished. But as performers, the damage was done. Their fall from superstardom wasn't gradual. It was violent. The Bee Gees didn't fail musically. They were punished culturally.